In this video, we're going to continue working with percents. When we're given a problem, such as what is 40% of 80, which we're going to be looking at shortly, there's going to be two ways of solving these types of problems. One is through using a proportion. If you are to use a proportion while you're solving this problem, what we need to remember is it's always going to be the value that's by the is over the value that is by the of. So it's is over of will equal, okay, so the is over of is one ratio. The other ratio is formed by the percent value, which is always given by the percent sign. So it's, if it's 40%, I change that into a fraction, such as 40 over 100. So 40% is 40 over 100. So that is where I'm going to use this percent over 100. Okay. Which I can also simplify if I remember what is the fraction that's equivalent to that percentage. Okay. So that's method one. The second method is by using an equation. If I use an equation to solve these problems, there are a couple words that I need to remember what they're equivalent to in math terminology. For example, anytime I see the word is, I'm going to translate that as an equal sign. The word of, I'm going to translate as a multiplication sign. Or it's going to tell me to basically multiply something. The last thing I need to remember is anytime I'm given a percent, I need to write that percentage as a decimal or a fraction. So you have a choice there, okay? Probably most commonly we write it as a decimal, but a fraction is just as valid, and sometimes it's actually easier. So let's go on to some examples. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to look at the problem, what is 40% of 80? So my first way I'm going to solve this is I'm going to look at it as a proportion, in which I'm going to figure out what is the is over the of and equal that the percentage over 100. So the first thing, let's look at the percentage over 100. So I find where my percentage is, in this case 40%, and change that into 40 over 100. I would do this first, so that way I've used the 40%. Then I go on to look at the rest of the problem. Well, I have what is. So basically that's going to be my x value. And is goes in my numerator, so it's going to be x. Then I look and say, well, I want to know it's of 80. So the key word here is of, which would go underneath. And I'm going to set those equivalent. Okay? I can solve this using the whole Hart's technique, in which I multiply the 100 times the x, and I get 100x. Then I'm going to multiply 80 by 40. Once again, I'm multiplying those, and equals 3,200. And then in order to solve these, I'm going to divide. I want to get the x by itself, so I'm going to divide by 100, leaving with x by itself, and whatever I do to one side of the equation, I also need to do to the other. So my final answer is x is going to equal 32. So this is the first technique. The second technique is to look at this in terms of writing an equation. And literally, I'm going to translate exactly what I'm reading. So I'm starting off with what. In this case, it's going to be x. Then I read the word is. And I remember is in math means equals. Then I go on to the 40%. And I need to write this either as a fraction or a decimal. So I can write this as 0.4, 4/10, taking the place of 40%. Or I could also write this as 40 over 100, 4 over 10, or simplified is going to be 2/5. Then the word of translate as a multiplication sign. I'm going to choose to use a little dot so it doesn't get confused with a with a variable x. Okay, and I'm going to copy this down below so I can show you using a decimal or using a subtraction. And then it's of 80. So then I take the 80 and I put it here. Well, if I multiply this, first one, 0.4 times 80 will give me 32. So x value will equal 32, which is what I solved for on the last side. In the second equation, okay, I think in the 80 over 1, I can simplify. 5 goes into 80, or 80 divided by 5 gives me 16. 16 times 2 will equal 32, so x will equal 32 as well. Okay, and I can simplify that. So in both cases, x will equal 32. Well, what happens if I change this up a little bit? So instead of solving for the is, I'm going to solve for the of in this case. So once again, as a proportion, okay, I'm going to look for the 40% first, okay. 40% will be written as 40 over 100, and then I can ignore the percentage since I've used it already. Then I look for the is. In this case it says 80 is, so it's 80 over, because it's is over of, and it's of what number? So that's going to be my x value, that's my unknown. Okay, so if I set this up, I'm going to choose to use the cross products, the Hart technique. So 80 times 100 is 8,000. Okay, then I do x times 40, and I get 40x. So in order to solve this, I'm going to divide both sides by 40, which will leave the x by itself. The 40s will cancel out, okay, or simplify out. Okay. On the other side, I'm going to end up with x will equal 200. So that's going to be my solution. X will equal 200. So 80 out of 200 will be 40%. It will be an equivalent ratio, which, by the way, I can also tell and double check. Okay, I can look at it in terms of 80 over x is equal to 40 over 100. Well, if I look 80 to 40, I divide by 2. So what number divided by 2 would give me 100? So it makes sense that x would equal 200. Okay. Final slide, I'm going to look at the same exact problem I just looked at on the previous slide, except for I'm going to set it up as an equation. So I have 80. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. 80. Then I see the word is. So it's 80 is equal to. I'm going to need to set up the 40% as a decimal or a fraction. So 40% is 40 over 100, 4/10, 2/5. Okay. Or I can say that's 0.4. Okay, I have a choice there. So once again, I'm going to set up the same thing below, and I'll show you both as a fraction and as a decimal. And then I'm left with of what number? So I'm going to multiply it by basically x. So in our first example here, using the decimal, in order to get the 0.4 by itself, or the x by itself, I'm going to need to divide both sides by 0.4. So if I set this up, 80 divided by 0.4. Well, if I remember from my decimals, if I have a decimal on the outside, I need to move it over one space, which means I need to do that on the inside. So it's 800 divided by 4 would be the same thing as 80 divided by 0.4. So I'm going to be left with 200 then. So x will equal 200, which is the answer I was expecting to get. Okay. If I'm using the fraction, I'm going to use the technique of multiplying by the reciprocal, so the 5's will cancel out, the 2's will cancel out, and I'm just left with the x. So if I multiply the 80 by 5 over 2 as well, I can think of the 80 over as 1. 80 divided by 2 is 40. 40 times 5 is going to be 200, which once again I get as the same answer. I hope this has been helpful, and good luck preparing for your test.